Welcome back, one and all, to the Religious Studies Project. And as ever, we're your hosts. Myself, David Robertson.
And myself, Christopher Cotter.
And his self, Christopher Cotter, is bringing you this week's interview, or rather, a roundtable discussion on the subject of AI and religion, and with the subtitle, An Initial Conversation, because this is really sketching out some of the possible avenues for exploration, which we'll be investigating in more depth further down the line. But more about that afterwards. But here, speaking to Chris, we have Beth Singler, Jonathan Tuckett, Michael Morelli, and Vivian Azimos. So take it away, gang.
Welcome to the University of Wolverhampton for our annual British Association for the Study of Religion's Roundtable Improvisation Session. I am Christopher Cotter, and I'm joined by Jonathan, Beth, Michael, and Vivian. And today they're going to be discussing, I'm going to be moderating and keeping them to time. We're going to be discussing the broad and interesting topic of religion and artificial intelligence, or AI, as I'm sure we'll say throughout the interview. But before this gets started, maybe if everyone could just go around, say who you are, what you do, why you're involved in this discussion, and then we'll get cracking.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Tuckett. It's been a while since I've actually spoken for the Religious Studies Project. Can I nick Kevin's moniker of the Religious Studies Regular?
Go for it.
Yeah, I am the Religious Studies Regular, because that's a much better thing to say than
Number
my
2.
non-academic affiliation.
And why are you talking to religion and AI?
Why am I talking to religion and AI? Because my interest is in philosophical anthropology and all about what we count as persons.
Okay. Beth?
I'm Beth Singler. I'm a research associate at the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion. I'm working specifically on a project about artificial intelligence and robotics, human identity in an age of nearly human machines. So that's an interesting title. We can discuss that if people want to. And I'm discussing this because this is my postdoc and I'm fascinated by the subject.
Wonderful. Vivian?
I'm Vivian Azimos. I'm a PhD student at Durham University, and I study online communities with a bit of a dabble in video games.
All right. That'll bring some interesting dynamics. And Michael?
Yeah, my name is Michael Morelli. I am a PhD student at University of Aberdeen, and I am studying theological ethics. And I'm researching digital technology. And so I like to bring theological, ethical discussion into any subject, phenomena, movement that involves technological innovation or advancement, and say what's going on here, what are the ethical issues or questions, and can we bring theology to bear on the discussion at hand, whatever that is. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Just before we get to the obvious question. I'd like Beth to say a little bit more about the Faraday Institute, just because we have been brought here together today because of Beth. Beth has brought this group of scholars together.
Lay the blame.
Lay the blame.
On Beth. Yeah, so put everyone together for a panel at the BASR conference on AI and religion. So the Faraday Institute is a place where conversations can happen about the relationship between science and religion. At the moment, we have one overarching project on the subject of human flourishing, and within that are 6 sub-projects, of which mine is just one, and the others I won't go into, but if you're interested, you can find more.
Very interesting.
They are very interesting. Okay, we've got things like MRI scans, we've got 2-dimensional objects, we've got Islamic scholarship. Yeah, there's a vast variety of things going on, and you can check that out on their website. But my particular project is this question of what does it mean to be human in an age of nearly human machines? What do developments and advances in technology around artificial intelligence and robotics impact on our understanding of what a person is? Jonathan's looking at what a person is, and how do we go forward in a world that is potentially changing in these directions?
Wonderful. Just going to brief pause, pick it up, because I just wanted to see how much time is remaining, which I cannot see. This would be if we
Let's go. Short but sweet. Just a minute version of talking about AI.
I am genuinely sorry.
No,
No repetitions, hesitations.
Okay, 47 minutes.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
We're fine,
plenty.
and
So
we'll
we
have to
stop
finish.
definitely by 11.
Yeah.
Are you keeping
Right
an eye
down
on
there.
time? I don't
I'm
have
keeping an
watches.
eye on
Oh,
time.
there we
It
go.
was 15:15 we started. And I'll try and police people coming in. Wonderful. So I'm going to probably have to do a little bit of policing because we're recording this a little bit on the fly. So there'll be people coming in and out of the room. So apologies to the listeners for any inevitable interruptions from people picking up their bags. Just to kick off then, why?
Why?
Why am I here? Why are people listening?
Wow, going straight for the existential questions.
Yeah,
I feel like
why?
me and Michael should be handling that one. You two
Yeah.
can handle like the robots.
Wow. Who wants to go? Okay.
Yeah, go.
Because increasingly the advances in this sort of technology and the amount of money going into these fields means that they are going to be more ubiquitous. We might not always have the kind of dystopian future that science fiction talks about, where it's really obvious where the artificial intelligence or the robots are, but it's going to become a part of our day-to-day lives. And part of our rest of our day-to-day life is also our religious conceptions of the world. And the kind of work that most of us do is considering how people create religious narratives, how they describe the world in a religious way. And I think my interest is that intermingling of science and technology into those narratives. So I'm still looking partially at what you might call new religious movements, whether they are described as that or not.
Well, I think to answer the question why, I think a lot of people have heard the term AI, artificial intelligence, used, but it's very difficult to separate the truths from the fictions, and I think that it's in some ways a very exaggerated sort of discussion field insofar as when people think AI, they probably tend to have images that are more popular cultural come up in their mind.
The Matrix.
Yeah.
Or every single newspaper article has a picture from the Terminator films.
Yeah.
Like almost every single one. I've got a collection of them.
Exactly. And so, I mean, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, this is what science fiction does, is it brings ideas about science and technological innovation and what have you into the broader cultural field to generate awareness and sort of artistically or philosophically explore what the future is going to look like if we have, say, for example, intelligent robots. But the problem with that is sometimes it's very exaggerated. So I think basically part of the reason why there's a lot of research going into this is to say, actually, how close are we, first off, to developing intelligent robots? And secondly, if we are very close or wherever we're at in terms of our being close to it, is this preferable? And if it is preferable, sort of what parameters do we set? What boundaries do we set for it? So it just brings up a whole lot of questions once you establish sort of the nuts and bolts of where we're at. Where could this go if we are in fact getting close to it? And it seems that we are. I just saw an article about Lowe's hardware store is planning on introducing intelligent robots into their hardware stores.
Well, yeah.
If I can provide another example for that, and the kind of where we're kind of at with technology at the moment is self-driving cars.
Yeah.
And the extent where we're at self-driving cars, and there's recently been issues with programming and questions of programming morality into the self-driving cars of, in the case of a brake failure, for instance, how do you program the car to choose, say, one life over another in order to kind of program basically morality into AI?
I have in a blind blank. What's the name of that robot? The Microsoft bot.
Tay.
Yeah. Because the other point to add on that is that bots are a lot more ubiquitous in our society than we actually realize. I mean, the most obvious example most people bring to mind is Tay and the fact that it became a neo-Nazi slur within about 5 minutes of its existence. But, I mean, what most people don't regularly realize, particularly online communities, is that there are bots inserted into those communities, into chat rooms, and they respond to real users and they are there for administrators to steer the conversation. And a lot of these users are not then aware that they are in fact interacting with a bot.
Has the bot then passed the Turing test?
Well, yeah, but what does the Turing test really do? I mean, this is one of my bugbears. Everyone just goes, it proves intelligence. No, it doesn't. It's about passing and appearing to be something else. And there's several issues around that culturally with what Turing was originally trying to set up. And I think what's really interesting about Tay, and this is my social anthropologist head on, that it was bad material in, bad data out, that they chose to choose Tay's vocab measure by what people were tweeting to it. So the human element, and in algorithms, there's been evidence that some algorithms written with a certain level of machine learning have implicit biases in them from their programmers. And there's been a few cases of adverts being inappropriately placed next to images of people on things like Facebook. So not forgetting, although we're talking about artificial intelligence and robotics, that the human element is going to drive a lot of this and our reactions to those things as well.
So one angle to go down would be if artificial intelligence, if it's truly... Could an AI have religion?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a question.
Battlestar Galactica.
Well, yeah. Are they going to be monotheists? Are they going to be polytheists? So, it is an interesting question. And the question of whether religions would accept AI and robots that claim to have religion. Would you baptize a robot was a question that came up recently. And someone suggests, well, yeah, as long as they're waterproof.
That's the main theological
impediment, yeah.
Or so I think someone else said, as long as they ask nicely. There's certainly a question. Where do non-human others fit into broader understandings of the world?
Well, I think part of my premise would be that there is a certain Euro-Christocentric kind of bias into that consideration, because, I mean, when we get outside of the European context, what we consider to be a person is a much more malleable concept, and then you have groups for which personhood already extends beyond the human realm, and then you have groups for which it's the converse, in which not all humans get to be persons. I mean, even in Europe, ironically enough, in the ancient Greeks, who we like to peg as the source of our entire culture, used to make a distinction between oikoumene and barbaria, and it was so basically if you were born in Greece, you're a person. If you were born out of Greece, no. You're not a person. We can do what we want to you.
I mean, there was relatively recently a move in EU legislation to recognise robots as electronic persons, partly because of the move towards automation, and in working employment legislation, how would we interact with these things? We need a way to describe them when we're actually in competition with them. But that could arguably be a first step to a separate legal status for the artificial person, whatever you want to call.
Typical Brussels red tape.
Well, he says, and then that raises another
How long
point.
have we got left?
If we want to get onto the questions around Brexit, what happens when we're not going to go all that way, but some states recognise robots or artificial intelligences in a particular way and other states or places don't? What kind of situation are we moving towards if we suggest intelligence for these beings, and yet we expect them to do all our work? I mean,
we own
them. Yeah. That historically is quite problematic. So that's something that needs thinking about as well. I mean, I love Star Wars to death, but it's very problematic in the buying and selling of intelligent beings. Droids.
Bring in maybe a sort of interesting test environment for this would be the online environment. Maybe to draw Vivian in. You've got that situation we've already been discussing, bots, interacting with people. So is there anything from your experience?
The online environment is already a very interesting one because of the level of anonymity that the human is provided, because I'm not going to go into the level of person to step on anybody's toes when we talk about that human element. And we kind of see this present in a lot of new kind of ad campaigns almost, where people are trying to appeal to the internet and saying, oh, you can name this thing. And we have things like Bodie McBoatface and Hitler being named as things. And, the bot where it learned from people tweeting at it, picking up on basically becoming a Nazi because people thought it would be funny to do that. but there's a certain level of anonymity, and it becomes a problem when people start studying the online environment because they assume that the level of anonymity means that people will automatically kind of not be true to themselves. But we find that to actually be the opposite. So there's been studies that proved that people online actually are more of their true selves than they are in the offline environment, which then when we take into account the discussions with bots kind of brings a lot of questions there as well, of people being almost completely their true selves in relation to an AI.
Does this mean that the bot is the authentic self?
Maybe.
The bot itself is being the authentic self.
Yeah.
Well, to bring it into an online context, a very interesting circumstance is there's a fellow who tweeted something about the former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, and he wrote about how his comments actually triggered an army of bots that had been purchased by the Canadian Conservative government's communications team, presumably. And so they actually had this army of bots that once it was triggered, they started attacking his social media stream. And at first he was really hurt because he thought they were real people, but then he started actually checking out the profiles of these people and realized these are bots. And I thought that was a very interesting case in which these bots are being used to sort of stifle political dissent. And then, of course, you also have the general phenomenon of I have this many followers on this platform, and really actually like 10,000 of them are bots that you purchased for £5.
Yeah.
And so what does that say? That actually bots are being purchased in order to gain social, cultural capital as well. So it is really interesting, these sorts of things in the online world as well. And they're not the exaggerated versions of, John Connor versus the Terminator and that sort of thing. They're actually already a part of our culture in these really strange ways, in terms of economics, because followers determine your influence, but then also politics as well. So
I'm going to complicate that another step, which
let's
is that
complicate it.
there are bots using Twitter as a primary example, because that's the one that I know. There are bots on Twitter that they've programmed to follow certain basically main people and certain, they'll follow the bot of McDonald's, let's just say, as an example. And so then you'll have the other person that they started following is another bot. And so you end up having a network of bots communicating with each other on an online platform. So you end up you talk about it as the robots kind of interacting with humans, but they're also interacting with each other on these social platforms.
That's how it starts.
The machines realize they don't need us at all.
Let them focus on Kanye West's Twitter feed while we take over the world.
Well, just to build off on that, like one of the interesting sci-fi examples is Automa, in which, because like sci-fi regularly goes with the AI will rise up against us, but the interesting thing about Automa is that the first AI ever gets bored with humanity and just refuses to communicate with them. But then also that film also raises some interesting questions in terms of our relationships, and there's a certain religious element to it in terms of how people react to bots and treat them as servants. But also building on what you were just saying, are we going to see a proliferation of religions using bots as a means of reaching out to the wider community? Like, why send out a missionary when you can send out a bot to do it for you?
Like going to George's work with the Jehovah's Witnesses yesterday, was talking about how they, buy themselves time in a sense by standing on street corners. So if you got a bot and programmed it to do it for you, would that be?
But that's not actually new. It sounds incredibly new, but you look back to some of the earliest temple cultures in the Middle East, and people would leave small statues. What they think, they don't entirely know. Archaeologists think they left small statues to be there praying for them when they had to go off and work and do other things. So this idea of self-replacement in the tasks that are too onerous has, and religious tasks included, has a long background. But it's just that tipping point of whether we replace the onerous tasks and it gets to a point where actually the non-onerous tasks are replaced as well, and we find ourselves perhaps without a job. which is a slight concern in certainly some fields. I
Yeah.
did
Well,
almost
yeah.
make a student cry the other day because I pointed out that law, in fact, is actually easily replaceable by artificial intelligence because it's all precedence-based, and she was applying to university to study law.
Dream killer.
Dream
Yeah,
killer.
yeah,
I am
dream
the dream killer.
Well, yeah, but then this also becomes like AI, because this feeds into some of your research, particularly on the transhumanist front, in terms of AI as being a sort of becoming a goal of humanity, and how is that kind of filtering out? Because if you explain a little bit about the transhumanist first, just for
Yeah.
anyone who is not aware of them,
Yeah.
and then also because I don't think we really touched on this, is like how other religious groups have reacted to the transhumanist.
So transhumanism broadly is the idea that through science and technology we can achieve a higher level of evolution, primarily described in terms of eradication of suffering, longevity of life, increased intelligence, and move to a more superior human being through science and technology. And there's various variations on that. But in terms of artificial intelligence, they tend to pick up on ideas of mind uploading, coexistence with cyber consciousness to become part of a sort of hive mind, perhaps, as well. Or the suggestion that if we developed a superintelligence, it may be able to solve some of these problems that we have. Like already at the moment, artificial intelligence is being employed in the treatment of cancer. There's a program working with the NHS on diagnosis. So the way in which technology can make our lives better, and the kind of more extreme version of that is a sort of superhuman version of ourselves produced through science and technology.
I'm going to direct the second half of that question that I asked to Michael, because that kind of like now that we've got the transhumanist notion, like how do Christians respond to that? That presumably because that presents an ethical issue of sorts.
Well, I don't know if I can speak for, quote unquote.
Everyone.
But yeah,
Christians.
speak for- yeah.
What
This is religious studies. We like our grand sweeping generalizations.
Yeah, but what I would say, and Beth and I were actually talking about this, might have been yesterday or the day before, but one of the things that you find in transhumanist discourses are actually goals, or what I think from a religious or theological standpoint you could describe as eschatologies or telos, that though they might not describe themselves as religions proper, they do actually use language that seems to suggest that it is a religion insofar as, however you want to define religion. Most religions have some sort of idea about what is going to happen in the future and what our role, or what humanity's role is in making that happen. And so when you look at a lot of transhumanist explanations of what they believe or what they're doing, or even artificial intelligence, there actually is a clear eschatology of we're working towards this definitive point in the future, and through that, or reaching that and working towards that, some sort of consciousness is going to be achieved, some sort of eternal life, or at least extension of life, is going to be achieved. Humanity is going to be able to move beyond where it is now, these sorts of things. And so I think that's where actually the religious element has a lot of influence, or that's where it hits the ground, where we can start viewing it as a religion, and that it has a certain eschatology.
And if you get into theories of the singularity, which is this kind of critical mass point of artificial intelligence that then just kind of, in some interpretations, is a mind fire that explodes across the universe, subsuming all other intelligences within it. In others, it's a bit more contained than that. But the ways in which future tech-focused groups are, or singularitarians, if you want to call them that, are describing this moment, it becomes an entity. And in some cases, they ascribe motivations to the superintelligence and what it will want, how it will want us to behave, how it will treat us as a lesser being. I mean, the comparison they make is sometimes between us and ants, in difference of intelligence and imposing nature. And yeah, some of those descriptions are very religious to my mind. Like, they won't use the word God, but it sounds...
Beth is being a little bit hesitant about going
but
towards
when
that.
you describe a supreme being,
Yeah. Okay.
Well, then it takes on a mythological component because then it almost to me then it sounds almost like Norse demigods, right? Like we're becoming demigods or titans or this sort of thing. So.
Well, yeah, I'm going to now that we've brought in the mythology, I'm going to direct this to Vivian, because particularly for me and Beth, our engagements with the transhumanists may be a little bit centric around certain persons, but then that raises the question of how prolific the transhumanist motion is and who's actually engaging in the mythos of transhumanism or similar related movements, which kind of speaks to the kind of research that you do.
So I mean, with the connection to mythology is because I look at the way that storytelling exists online, and it ends up questioning a lot of definitions of mythology, which I'm not going to get into because that's a whole nother roundtable discussion.
Watch this space.
Basically, when you start looking at the way that people tell stories online, it plays with a lot of ideas of knowledge. Transhumanism I haven't come across too that much, but I also haven't been looking for it. So that's kind of a different environment. But there is a lot of playing with knowledge and intelligence in the matter of kind of exploring the known versus the unknown in their forms of storytelling. And because it's the online environment, you can do storytelling through images very easily. And a lot of these images are therefore photoshopped or manipulated in some way. So that idea of knowledge is again kind of reiterated in the fact that you could be looking at something that's not inherently quote unquote real.
Yeah. I think what's quite interesting, the overlap that we haven't really talked about much, but is in storytelling for the purpose of producing fear.
Yes.
So which is definitely relevant to your work, but what I've also looked at is some of the narratives about what the singularity will want and how it will behave. And it's too complicated to go into it in too much depth, but there are some ideas that suggest the future singularity will punish those who haven't brought it about through replication and simulation, kind of like a Matrix style world. And that has had a definite, on some portions of the community online, had a definite fear effect, where if you even hear about this suggestion, you're trapped into a loop of having to work towards the creation of the artificial intelligence because you know about it now and it can punish you in the future. So I think that's really fascinating.
So are we all now screwed?
Yeah, sorry. Every time I present on this, I'm like, I'm really sorry, but I'm now going to tell you something that's going to doom you.
That is inherently connected to a lot of the fear that is created in the storytelling that I'm specifically looking at, tends to kind of be focused on the idea of being trapped within basically an inability to move socially speaking, and you're inherently trapped in being both silenced and unable to represent yourself socially. And so you're unable to move within that context. So that idea of being trapped in a lot of different ways is definitely the main source of fear, at least from what I've found so far.
Well, yeah, this kind of starts to speak to the kind of stuff that I do, because part of the reason I like that I talk about this notion of personhood is also about who you decide are persons has a consequence for the kind of reality you live in as a result of that. So, the deciding whether AI are persons or not has massive consequences. So if you have the artificial intelligence that says, no, if you did not help bring me about, you are no longer a person. I mean, and that's also what's fascinating about this is the idea that not only are we asking the question whether AI is a person, but then all of a sudden you may have AI asking the question of whether we are persons.
Yeah. And even in terms of if AI is, intelligent sort of robots become a reality, an everyday reality, is the best term would the best term be used to describe them? Would it be person? Or, I mean, it's interesting because if we describe them as person, is that what guarantees their rights or sort of identity? Is it possible to actually say, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be considered a person in order to be granted certain sort of treatments, right? So that there's, I think, a lot of discussion to be had there is, I mean, do we necessarily want to force the term person, however we define that, onto a sort of sentient machine, or do we want to actually be thoughtful about how would we define this, or how would it define itself? How would it describe itself?
I suppose historically you could say that the closer we have allowed people to be described as persons, the more rights we give them.
Sure.
So obviously animal rights.
Yeah.
And historically our relationship with various different racial groups and women as well. When women
And children.
And children. I mean, this is, we have precedent for understanding how this relationship might go, and maybe we should learn historical lessons before we actually get to a point where we have ubiquitous intelligent robots living with us, potentially, and think about, do we want to treat them as a race is not the right word, as a grouping that we treat poorly because we've decided they should do work for us all the time.
I mean, just to build on that, I'll try and start wrapping things up by going to a joke, because like one of the when I first started talking about like the philosophical anthropology in the science fiction cases, one of the questions I got was, "What's this to do with robots?" And to which I responded, "Well, it's not necessarily just about robots." So to build on the example of animals, I told this story about how when I had a dog, the dog would do a poo and would look at me, and I would get it was like this look of embarrassment, so I would turn my back so that the dog, I wasn't looking at the dog. But in that respect, that's giving attributing personhood to that dog, of being within my dog's social construction of reality, that when she does her business, that is not something to be observed. And this is what I think is really fascinating about the concept of AI in general, is that it makes us also question other things that we've kind of taken for granted for a long time as well.
And just to pop back quickly to the Turing test, which I always say is deeply flawed and no one should really bother citing it, but
Sorry.
My bad.
in some ways even the question of intelligence is irrelevant, because we as humans will impute intelligence or not intelligence on other things. So we would never possibly be able to prove artificial intelligence is a genuine intelligence, because we don't have a proof of genuine intelligence anyway. We always assume human beings are conscious and other things are less conscious.
No political comments from the Americans, please.
So people will have noticed that my voice dropped out for a while there as I was doing some policing, but I was listening, and this could go on forever. But just for our benefit of our listeners who might want to pick up on some of your research afterwards, where can they find you? Are you on Twitter? Anyone?
I'm always on Twitter.
If you had
I'm a bot.
one online presence that people could go to find your work, where would it be, Michael?
Yeah, Twitter is a great place to meet me. So MCHLMORELLI at Twitter.com.
Alrighty. Vivian?
I actually have a website that has a link to my Twitter and academia page and stuff like that. So, I'm going to selfishly direct people towards my website, which is god-mode.org.
Wonderful.
Love it. Twitter at BVL_Singler. It's probably the best one. Or there's at Faraday_AI, but BVL Singler's a bit more active.
Yeah.
It's better bot.
Yeah, and it benefits you.
It's actually me. Well, they're both me.
Yeah.
They're both me.
And Jonathan, where's your presence?
Send a pigeon. It will probably know where it's going.
Wonderful. Well, you've been listening to the Religious Studies Project. Thank you, everyone. Good night, morning, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Did you enjoy hearing that podcast, David?
Very much so.
Yeah,
Very much so.
Good.
Very good it was too.
We're bringing the beard back to the Religious Studies Project next week in the form of Brad Stoddard's awesome beard. He's been speaking with Finbar Curtis about religious freedom in America, some theoretical considerations. And so we know that if Brad puts the word theoretical in the title, it's a sure winner. As are all of Brad's interviews. So,
Indeed, and it's the first you're going to be hearing from quite a few interviews by Brad this year, as he recorded a rake of them at the AAR this year. So we're going to spread them out, so you don't get too, over-Bradded.
Exactly. There's a sort of meme about cat breading, isn't there? I wonder if there's one about over-bradding. Brad is also one of the exec committee officers for NASA, and these podcasts should also be seen in some way as showcasing NASA, who are one of our generous sponsors, along with the British Association for the Study of Religions and the International Association for the History of Religions. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, NASA.
Indeed. As ever, if you want to support the project, you can do so by using our amazon.com.co.uk and .ca links. It really does make a big difference. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Google+, apparently. You can go to our YouTube page, which is growing all the time, starting to take off. And you can join the conversation at the website and leave a comment or a question in response to this or any other episode.
Yeah, the comments have been starting to get a little more lively on the website, and by little, we're talking, a smidgen, as you might say. But
we'd love to hear from you, and you can of course also email us at editors@religiousstudiesproject.com, and if you send us an interesting comment or question, we might read it out on air.
Wouldn't that be nice?
But other than that, the only thing left to say is,
thanks for listening.